The same story played out in September 1955, and it played out with the Greeks. 1955, when we were watching Audrey Hepburn and Cary Grant movies, the great riots of Istanbul happened. During the Muslim rule, Greeks were allowed to live in Istanbul, even though they were treated like second-class citizens. And by the 1950s, the Ottoman Empire had transmuted themselves into the Republic of Turkey. But it was only a republic in the way that Iran is a republic today. In 1955, Turkey committed one of the most unthinkable acts. Nobody even talks about it, because most people don't even know that it even happened. And this is after they tried to wipe out the entire Armenian race through genocide in the early 1900s, which according to them is just rumor and didn't really happen. In fact, President Obama has refused to call it a genocide. September 6, 1955, was the Great Riot. The Muslims and the Greeks had been arguing over who the city belonged to. They had been arguing for centuries. And so finally the Turkish prime minister had a bomb planted in the Turkish consulate in Greece. The idea, make it look like the Greeks did it. And so all the Turkish people would be outraged and they'd kill all the Greeks in response. The bomb was a dud, but that didn't matter. They ran the headlines, even though it never exploded, they said that it did. And they rioted, and a bloodbath resulted. The Turks took to the streets and lit all of Istanbul on fire. They unleashed a furious torrent of murder and rage and rape on the town. One journal described it like Kristallnacht, when Nazis smashed and vandalized Jewish stores in Germany. This is from a Turkish film depicting the riots. In 1955, Turkish mobs destroyed Greek homes, businesses. They destroyed churches in a mad frenzy for 9 hours. Rioters destroyed thousands of Greek and Christian homes, businesses, hotels, schools, hospitals. Almost every church was razed to the ground. 73 of the 81 churches in the city were destroyed. In one of them lived an old priest. On one September morning, they came in and they smashed his doors down of his church. They dragged him out of bed by his hair. They tried to pull the hair out of his head in strands. And they did it. And then they proceeded to do the same with his beard. They beat him and left him to die withered in pain. And all the while his church, which he called home, burned in the background. Another priest suffered the same fate, but since he was younger, his hair was firmer and they couldn't tear it out. It was too tough, so they scalped him. 1955? Yeah, they scalped many others too. They took the priests, they stripped them naked, they strung them up with a rope, tied them to the back of moving cars, and dragged their bodies through the streets. 1955, gang. If you were too old, well, they then just left you in your bed. And then they set you and your house or your church on fire. And you laid there, burning to death. The youth, they were circumcised in the streets. The rioters would demand young men who claimed to be Muslim pull it out and let us see it. As a crowd would gather around. Pull it out, let us see it. You see, Turkish Muslim males are circumcised. Christians were not. So it was easy to tell. So they forced them to take off their pants in public and prove they were Muslim. And if they weren't, the young Turks, to the other young Turks, would use a hand knife and circumcise them in the middle of the street and lynch everybody else. Lynching and the murders were going on in the streets. It was a total massacre that the media completely ignored. And it happened less than 60 years ago. And we know who did it, and they're the same people who are doing it today in Egypt. They are shooting people, they are killing them in the streets. Their bodies are lying in the middle of villages. Brotherhood members are snatching villagers and threatening them. You either convert to Islam or you'll be beheaded or raped. Children are being taken from their parents and raped. This is what the Christians in Syria are warning us will happen if we support the rebels. And yet, today there was a story in the paper that we are now sending them guns. This is how diplomacy has always worked in the Middle East. When you're circumcising people in the streets with a pocket knife, when the prescriptions written on the parchment to the Geneva Conventions are not what you use as your rule book, you can find a way around everything. It's about power and control, and most importantly, it's about which sect will preside over the next great empire. And now we're getting into the middle of it. We have been in the business of tearing down dictatorships now for the last few years. And we're all confused on what's happening. We're perplexed. We're replacing them with radical terrorists. If we get rid of Assad in Syria, just like Egypt, just like Libya, radical Islamists will seize power. These are radicals and extremists who want to kill you, and we are partnering with them? It is the height of insanity, and it is deadly. Not for our children yet, but for possibly millions of children of theirs. The president has made the point, after all, it's all about the children, and he's right. It is about the children. It is about the children who have decided they don't want to be part of Islam. The children who are Christian. The children who are atheists. The children who are Jewish, or the children who happen to be Islamic, but from a different sect. Those who decide for themselves. See, we have something called freedom of religion. That's a Western point of view. You know how the West is so bad? That came from the West. That God endowed each of us with certain rights that no man can take away. That's Western thinking. Eastern thinking is, the Quran says this. Pay a tax if you're lucky, if you want to disagree. So when anyone decides to talk to you about the children, remember, just remember the children from the 1950s in Turkey that were ignored by the media that time. Just like the children are being ignored by the president and the mainstream media today. That is history. And if we don't know it, we will repeat it. And our children will be sitting here and saying, how did our parents not know?